The dawn of August 7th, 2025, broke not with light, but with a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the very soul of the eastern Zaporizhia plains. It was a sound that promised violence, a mechanical growl that had long since replaced the song of birds in this scarred land. For Private Dmitry Volkov, huddled in the stifling confines of a BMP-3 armored personnel carrier, the sound was the heartbeat of inevitability. He was 19, a conscript from a city of smokestacks and gray skies, and the rich Ukrainian soil smelled alien and hostile. "Keep your head down, boy," Sergeant Ivanov grunted, his voice a gravelly rasp that cut through the engine's drone. Ivanov was a man carved from the harsh realities of a dozen frozen conflicts, his face a roadmap of cynicism. "First contact is always the worst. You live through that, you might just live through the day." Dmitry nodded, his mouth too dry for words. He clutched his AK-12, the polymer stock slick with the sweat of his palms. Outside his narrow vision slit, the world was a blur of gray sky and endless wheat fields. But he didn't need to see it to feel it. He was a single link in a chain of steel stretching over 3 kilometers long. 50 T-90M tanks, their 48-ton frames crushing the earth, led the charge. 70 BMPs like his own flanked them. Metal beasts pregnant with over 600 souls like him, all hurtling toward a destiny prescribed by men in clean uniforms hundreds of miles away. The mission, as Ivanov had explained with a contemptuous spit of sunflower seeds, was simple, a show of force. They were to punch through to a captured base, fortify it, and turn it into a dagger aimed at the heart of Ukraine. Dnipro, they were told, was only 120 kilometers away. The thought was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. They were the tip of the spear, an unstoppable force meant to shatter Ukrainian morale. The Kremlin had demanded Ukraine pull back 50 kilometers. President Zelensky, they'd heard on the encrypted comms, had replied with 2 words: "Not one step." And so, the serpent moved. The air in the APC was thick with the smell of diesel, hot metal, and the unwashed fear of 10 men crammed into a space built for 8. Dmitry tried to focus on the rhythmic clang of the track links, a sound that was supposed to be reassuring, a testament to their power. But with every kilometer they consumed, a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. This felt too easy, too quiet. Miles away, in a reinforced concrete bunker buried deep beneath Dnipro, the quiet was one of intense, calculated focus. General Mikhailo Havrilenko stared at the massive screen on the wall, his face illuminated by the cold, thermal glow of satellite imagery. The Russian convoy was not a terrifying monster to him, it was a beautiful, predictable target. A fat, slow serpent crawling obligingly into a trap. "Speed?" he asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the furious energy that coursed through the operations center. "Holding steady at 28 kilometers per hour, sir," an intelligence officer replied, her fingers flying across a keyboard. "Tight formation. They're arrogant." Havrilenko allowed himself a thin, grim smile. Arrogance was a weakness he knew how to exploit. For weeks, his people had been working on this. Not a plan of defense, but a plan of annihilation. He had watched NATO planners wargame scenarios with their sophisticated, expensive tools of war. He had thanked them for their support, and then he had turned to his own people. The engineers who could turn scrap metal into deadly weapons, the drone pilots who learned their craft on gaming simulators, the soldiers whose land was being consumed. They expect artillery. They expect an ambush along the main roads, Havrilenko said, more to himself than to his staff. They do not expect the swarm, and they do not expect the ghosts. He looked at the clock on the wall. 06:12 a.m. Every minute that passed brought the convoy closer to its destination, closer to digging in and becoming an unbreakable fortress. There was no time for debate. "Launch the first wave," he commanded. The order was quiet, but it echoed through the room with the force of a detonating shell. "And tell Colonel Mortars to unleash his riders. Let's show them what Ukrainian ingenuity tastes like." The room erupted into a symphony of controlled chaos. Orders were relayed, coordinates confirmed. On forward airstrips hidden in plain sight, 20 long-range reconnaissance UAVs were already climbing into the gray sky, silent observers mapping the Serpent's every scale. In dusty hangars and camouflaged workshops, a deadlier wave was being armed. 80 suicide drones, their frames cobbled together in defiance of global supply chains, each carrying a 12-kilogram-shaped charge. They were cheap, costing less than a single Russian helmet, but their purpose was priceless: to break the Serpent's back. And further south, hidden behind a low, earthen ridge, another sound was beginning to stir. Not the rumble of tanks, but the high-pitched, angry whine of two-stroke engines. The ghosts were getting ready to ride. The stillness over the wheat fields shattered at 06:28 a.m. For Dmitri, inside the BMP, it began as a strange buzzing sound, like a cloud of metallic insects. Ivanov squinted at the vision port. What in the hell is that? Before anyone could answer, the sky filled with them. Dozens of small dark shapes skimming the tops of the wheat, flying impossibly low and fast. They weren't sleek, military-grade predators. They looked crude, almost homemade, like monstrous dragonflies built in a garage. The Russian defensive fire was immediate and furious. The rhythmic thumping of the BMP's 30mm autocannons and the frantic chatter of machine guns filled the air. Tracers stitched incandescent patterns against the gray sky, but it was like trying to shoot a swarm of wasps with a shotgun. They were too many, too low, too fast. The first impact was less a sound and more a physical blow. A deafening crack, closer than thunder, slammed into Dmitri's ears. The entire 18-ton chassis of the BMP ahead of them lifted, as if plucked by an invisible giant, and flipped onto its side in a screech of tortured metal. A split second later, the shaped charge's molten jet found the fuel tank. The resulting fireball was a hungry orange maw that swallowed the vehicle whole. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded the troop compartment. The confident banter from minutes ago was replaced by sharp, fearful gasps. "Contact! Drones! All around us!" someone screamed over the internal comm. Another explosion, this time to their right. A cluster of Ural trucks carrying mortar shells went up in a chain reaction, a rolling wave of concussive force that hammered against their hull. Dmitri could feel the heat through the thick steel. The screams he heard now were not from the radio, they were from outside. Then came the second phase of the aerial attack, something more insidious, more psychologically terrifying. A new set of drones appeared, larger quadcopters flying higher and slower. They were almost taunting the gunners. "Easy targets," a Russian gunner yelled from a nearby vehicle, his PKM opening up. A stream of bullets connected with one of the hovering drones. Instead of falling, it detonated. An airburst. The drone had been carrying a TM-62 anti-tank mine. The explosion sprayed a lethal cone of shrapnel downward, scything through a platoon of infantry who had dismounted to form a defensive perimeter. 13 men were shredded in an instant. The psychological trap was sprung. To shoot the drones was to detonate them. To ignore them was to let them drop their deadly cargo. It was a choice between two kinds of death. In under 6 minutes, the disciplined column was a chaotic junkyard. 11 vehicles were burning fiercely, casting pillars of oily black smoke into the sky. 2 fuel tankers had ruptured, spreading rivers of fire across the road. Tank crews, believing they were under a massive artillery barrage, abandoned their vehicles only to be cut down by the shrapnel from the flying mines. The Serpent was no longer moving. It was thrashing in its death throes, a wounded beast bleeding fire and men onto the plains. Dmitri's BMP had swerved off the road, its tracks bogged down in a muddy irrigation ditch. Ivanov was screaming orders, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of explosions and dying men. The advance had ground to a halt. The kill zone was set. And then, through the acrid smoke and the din of battle came a new sound. A sharper, high-pitched roar that cut through everything. The relentless, angry scream of motorcycle engines. Alexander gripped the handles of his RPG-26, his knuckles white. The wind whipped past him, carrying the stench of burning diesel and cooked meat. Behind him, his driver, Taras, expertly weaved the 145-kilogram dirt bike between craters and the wreckage of a smoldering supply truck. They were one of 200. 200 bikes carrying 400 soldiers exploding from behind a ridge like a cavalry charge from hell. Wing 1, on the southern flank, hug the smoke. Colonel Mortars' voice crackled in Alexander's earpiece. Wing 2, wide to the north. Use the tree line. Wing 3, you're with me. We cut off their tail. No retreat. They were ghosts. Fast, agile, and utterly terrifying. Their reinforced bikes could hit 60 kilometers an hour in under 5 seconds, weaving through terrain that would trap a 48-ton tank. They were a swarm of a different kind. Flesh and blood, fueled by gasoline and a burning need for vengeance. Alexander's target came into view through the smoke, a T-90M, its turret traversing wildly, searching for a target it couldn't comprehend. Taras slid the bike to a halt behind the burning hulk of a BMP, giving them a few precious seconds of cover. 280 meters! Taras yelled over the engine's scream. Alexander didn't need to be told. His world narrowed to the rocket's simple iron sights. He took a breath, held it, and let the muscle memory from countless hours of training take over. He squeezed the trigger. The backblast kicked up a cloud of dust as the rocket shot forward, a tiny comet of vengeance. He didn't wait to see the impact. Go! Go now! He yelled, slapping Taras on the shoulder. The bike fishtailed in the loose dirt and shot away just as the T-90M's engine block erupted in a geyser of white-hot flame. The massive turret, weighing nearly 12 tons, was launched 9 meters into the air, spinning like a tossed coin before slamming into the ground upside down. All around them, the battle was a whirlwind of motion and fire. Motorcycle gunners fired anti-tank guided missiles from the hip, dismounting to take a shot before hopping back on and vanishing into the smoke. One team got within 23 meters of a BMP, the gunner close enough to feel the heat of the explosion that vaporized the vehicle. Wing 3, Mortars' group, delivered the killing blow. They severed the convoy's rear, hitting 2 fuel trucks carrying 18,000 liters of diesel each. The resulting fireball rose 45 meters into the sky, a miniature sun that consumed 3 more APCs and incinerated at least 24 Russian soldiers where they stood. Trapped, burning, and beset on 3 sides by phantoms on roaring machines, the Russian formation collapsed entirely. Dmitri was thrown from his bogged-down BMP when a nearby explosion blew the rear hatch off its hinges. He landed hard in the mud, his ears ringing, his vision swimming. He saw Sergeant Ivanov trying to rally the other soldiers, only to be cut down by a burst of machine gun fire from a gunner who had dismounted from his bike. The man moved with a fluid grace, clearing survivors with grenades and short, controlled bursts, his movements coordinated by a drone hovering invisibly overhead. In just 14 minutes, the motorcycle assault had destroyed or disabled 21 armored vehicles. The Russian column was no longer a fighting unit. It was a graveyard of molten steel and smoldering corpses. The roar of the motorcycles subsided, replaced by the crackle of flames and the sporadic, desperate pop of small arms fire. The smoke began to settle, revealing the full extent of the carnage. The ring of destruction was complete. At 06:57 a.m., the final phase began. From the east, figures began to emerge from the smoke, not on bikes, but on foot. 3 mechanized infantry platoons, 120 Ukrainian soldiers, advanced steadily, using the knocked-out Russian vehicles for cover. Their rifles were leveled, their movements calm and professional. From the north and south, the surviving motorcycle units dismounted, pressing inward, shrinking the kill zone from a sprawling kilometer to a tight 500-meter circle of death. Dmitri scrambled into a shallow depression, his rifle lost in the mud. He was with a handful of other survivors, their faces black with soot, their eyes wide with terror. They were boys, just like him. They had been told they were liberators, part of an invincible army. Now they were rats in a trap. Intercepted radio chatter confirmed their fate. Frantic calls for artillery support went unanswered. Their guns were out of range. No reinforcements could penetrate the wall of fire and death that now surrounded them. The final blow came not with a bang, but with a series of soft thumps from the distance. A moment later, the air was filled with a high, whistling sound. Ukrainian mortar teams, guided by the live drone feeds, began a precise, merciless bombardment. Each 82 Timniader shell landed exactly where it was intended. One obliterated a BMP that was still trying to fire its main gun. Another landed in the middle of the last pocket of organized resistance, forcing the survivors, including Dmitry, to flee the depression and run towards the tree line. They ran directly into the guns of the encircling infantry. It was over. A Ukrainian soldier, his face grim and weary, shouted in Russian, "Drop your weapons, on your knees, now!" There was no hesitation. Rifles clattered to the ground. Body armor was unstrapped and discarded. Hands went into the air. Dmitry sank to his knees, the wet soil soaking through his trousers. The overwhelming feeling wasn't fear or anger, but a profound, hollow emptiness. He looked up and saw one of the motorcycle riders, the man who had killed Ivanov, standing over him. The Ukrainian soldier looked down, his eyes not filled with hate, but with an exhausted sorrow. He was just a man, like Dmitry, fighting for his home. By 07:15 a.m., the silence was almost as deafening as the battle had been. Ukrainian engineers were already moving through the wreckage, cataloging captured weapons, spray-painting their own insignia on salvaged equipment. The tally was staggering. 29 armored vehicles utterly destroyed, including 9 of the formidable T-90M tanks. Over 140 Russian soldiers lay dead. 180, including Dmitry and 2 company commanders, were now prisoners of war. The assault that began at dawn, a confident push to expand an empire, had been erased from existence in just 95 minutes. It wasn't annihilated by a superior force, but by a superior idea. Drones that cost less than the boots on Dmitry's feet had crippled tanks worth millions. Motorcycles, relics of a simpler time, had outmaneuvered a modern mechanized column. As the sun finally burned through the morning haze, it illuminated a scene of total devastation. It was a testament not just to a military victory, but to a profound truth that the men in the Kremlin had forgotten, that the will of a people defending their own soil is a force of nature, and that ingenuity, born from desperation and love of country, can dismantle even the most fearsome serpent of steel. The war was far from over, but on this day, on this small patch of Ukrainian earth, the ghosts had won. This story, though fictional, is built on a powerful truth we see playing out in conflicts around the world. The greatest strength isn't always found in the biggest budget or the most advanced technology. True power often lies in adaptability, ingenuity, and the unshakable will to defend what is yours. It teaches us that asymmetrical thinking, using your opponent's weight and arrogance against them, can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. It's a reminder that the human spirit, when fighting for survival and freedom, is the most formidable weapon of all. What part of this tactical approach impressed you the most? The drone swarm, the flying mines, or the motorcycle cavalry charge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you appreciate stories of strategy and resilience, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content.